They're willing to sacrifice everything to that goal. And they've duped the whole world into it. That's why the whole world, we have a goal that everyone agrees on of eliminating our climate impact, but we don't have a goal of climate livability. We don't have a goal of energy abundance. We don't have a goal of human flourishing. Ultimately, if you value individual freedom, you have to get that physically so much of the manifestation of what you enjoy about individual freedom is made possible by fossil fuels. We're already seeing a global energy crisis, and we're already seeing blackouts in the United States, the degradation of our grid, and we haven't even moved in the direction of net zero. I just believe in freedom in money, and Bitcoin is a fascinating innovation in that. It's really, gold has always had this amazing kind of, set of characteristics, much like fossil fuels do.
On the Spot with Michelle Makori is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin.
Hello, I'm Michelle Makori. Thank you again for joining us. As we head closer to the vote in the US election, energy policy and climate policy are major issues of debate. And the next meeting of the largest annual climate conference in the world, the UN's COP29, takes place just 6 days after the US presidential election in November. Now, the UN has been leading the charge for a net zero emissions world by 2050, a target that's become a global rallying cry in the fight against so-called climate change. Net zero means balancing the amount of greenhouse gases we emit with the amount that we remove from the atmosphere. And this ambitious goal gained formal traction with the Paris Agreement adopted at the 2015 UN Climate Change Conference. Now, the 2050 deadline wasn't explicitly outlined in the agreement, but it has quickly become the benchmark for countries and corporations. And today, more than 140 nations, including the world's largest polluters, China, the US, India, and the European Union, have pledged to reach net zero. On day one of the Biden-Harris administration, the US rejoined the Paris Agreement, and the Biden-Harris administration embraced the goal of reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Former President Trump pulled the US out of the agreement during his term, and he's recently said that he would again yank the US out of the UN accord and that net zero would be dead on day one. Well, my next guest says that net zero is a death sentence for billions of people, and that if you want to make the world a better place, one of the best things you can do is fight for more fossil fuel use, more burning of oil, coal, and natural gas. And that more fossil fuel use will actually make the world a far better place, a place where billions more people will have the opportunity to flourish. Alex Epstein is a leading voice in the debate over the future of energy. He's a philosopher, commentator, and author of 2 groundbreaking books and the New York Times bestseller, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuel and The Fossil Future. He's the founder and president of the Center for Industrial Progress, a think tank dedicated to promoting industrial growth and progress. And he's a staunch advocate for the continued use and expansion of fossil fuels, arguing that these energy sources are not only essential for human flourishing, but are also the most reliable and efficient means of sustaining our modern way of life. Alex, welcome to Kitco. Very good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. And that was a super objective introduction, both about the state of policy and about my views. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
All right. Well, I did enjoy the book very much. Read it, very thoroughly researched, meticulously sourced, and you do certainly make a solid case for your viewpoint that the framework in which we view fossil fuels and their environmental impact needs to be reframed, that the benefits well outweigh the side effects, as you put it, especially in the context of looking at it from a human flourishing and human advancement perspective, as opposed to the current anti-impact viewpoint.
Yeah, you really read the book.
Oh, I read the book. It was a great read, actually.
Well, even people who read the book, it's interesting. I mean, I tried to, one of the things I do in Fossil Future is I repeat myself sometimes, which you're technically not supposed to do in writing, but at the end of every chapter, the beginning of every chapter, I do recaps. And people say sometimes, oh, you said the same thing. And I think, well, because often people don't get it. So it's very heartening when people really get it, because what you're focused on from the outset is my view that this is really an issue about the framework. So the fundamental ideas about values, about how the world works, about thinking methods, that's really what's at issue in this. And actually, it's not really about a scientific dispute. I'm not really disputing a whole bunch of science. I'm disputing the way people are thinking about the science along with other variables when they think about fossil fuels.
Although you do call into question some of the science and this idea of always trust the scientists. But before we get into that, and again, I like the fact that you repeated certain things because it really helps to grasp the concept, to drill it down. And yes, everything in life, I guess, is arguably a matter of perspective and your position in looking at it. And yes, you do look at it from the human flourishing perspective. Before we break down all of that, I want to start off with a very, very simple place. And that is what may be very obvious to some people, but what are fossil fuels?
It's a great question because often people dedicate their life to opposing them, or at least they want to get rid of them, and they don't know what they are. So, I mean, the way I think of it, and you need to break it down a little bit, but it's basically, I'd put it as high energy hydrocarbons derived from ancient life. Like that's the key, that sort of captures everything. So high energy hydrocarbon, a hydrocarbon means something that's primarily composed of hydrogen and carbon. And the significance of that is when you burn it, when you burn a hydrocarbon, it releases a lot of energy as the bonds break apart. And it also creates, when you're burning it, you're using oxygen. So you combine the hydrogen with the oxygen, you create water vapor. And then, of course, you combine the carbon and the oxygen, and you create CO2, which is the biggest concern people have in terms of our impact on climate. It comes from ancient dead life, which is important. It has important implications for thinking about how much of it is there. Like how is it going to renew more quickly than it developed? And I don't believe it renews more quickly than developed, but I think there's just a stratospheric amount of it. People don't realize just how much of it there is, but I do believe it at least mostly comes from ancient dead life. And then part of it coming from ancient dead life, like plants and plankton and stuff like that, is it's often combined with certain things like, say, sulfur, and nitrogen, so things that are part of plants. When you burn them, it also can release those into the atmosphere. So you have things like sulfur dioxide, which can contribute to smog, nitrogen oxides. So it just helps you, I think, if you really get what fossil fuels are, it helps you think about both the benefits of them, primarily the energy we get, and the side effects in terms of CO2 and then what you would call air pollutants. Although what's interesting, though, is you have to think about the benefits in terms of energy. But once you realize, wait a second, they emit CO2, you also have to be open to there could be benefits from more CO2 in terms of more plant growth and more warming in cold places, in addition to negative side effects.
All right. Now, you talk about the secret sauce of fossil fuels, saying it's the combination of natural storage, natural concentration, and natural abundance harnessed ultra cost effectively by generations of economic innovation and achievement. So break that down for us.
Since I know it's a financial podcast, it just occurs to me that this sort of applies to gold and money throughout history. And you could also think of it as in terms of the potential of Bitcoin, but I'll apply it to energy, and then maybe talk about some analogies. The thing that people need to grapple with is that fossil fuels are clearly uniquely cost-effective and scalable. So by cost-effective, I mean affordable. A lot of people can afford to use them in large quantities. Reliable, they're available when needed and the quantity needed. They're versatile, so able to power every type of machine, not just electrical machines. Most of the machines in the world are not powered by electricity. They involve usually directly burning fossil fuels, whether it's airplanes, container ships, or even many things that could use electricity, like industrial levels of heat, because either fossil fuels are the only way to do it, or they're the best way to do it. So they have this combination of affordability, reliability, versatility, then scalability, the ability to provide energy of this type, affordable, reliable, scalable, for billions of people in thousands of places. So people deny this. They pretend solar and wind are rapidly replacing fossil fuels, et cetera. It's just not happening. We're not in an energy transition. We're in an energy addition at most. So we're using more fossil fuels than ever every year, despite the fact that getting rid of fossil fuels via net zero is literally the #1 political goal in the world. So we have the thing that everyone hates, and yet we're still using more of it than ever, even though we're vowing to use none of it very soon. And what it points to is there's something really special about fossil fuels. So that's the context for your question is we need to recognize there's some kind of secret sauce, and it can't just be a conspiracy. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why does Japan use fossil fuels? Why does South Korea use it? Why does Singapore use it? Like, they don't have native reserves. Why would they do it? And it has these two things. They have very special natural attributes, and then there's a whole history of economic achievement. So the natural attributes are natural concentration. They store a lot of energy in a small amount of space. That's very good, particularly for transportation. But in general, it's just good for anything to store more in less space with less weight or mass. They're naturally stored, which means they're like a natural battery. It turns out an energy to make a man-made battery is just incredibly, incredibly expensive. Like, I've run the numbers on backing up the world for a day using Elon Musk's best prices with batteries. You're talking $100 to $200 trillion. So that's global GDP or twice global GDP. So man-made storage is expensive. Natural storage is super cheap. And then the third thing is natural abundance. There's a ton of them. So they have that. And only one other source of energy has that at this point, which is nuclear energy, particularly what's called nuclear fission, which is the only form of nuclear we can really use. But what fossil fuels has that nuclear doesn't is this generations of economic achievement. The fact that fossil fuels have these attributes is great, but it doesn't make it into reality. To make it into reality, you need millions of people all over the world actually figuring out how to harness these attributes for every person, for every purpose around the world. Like, we had to figure out, how do you make an electrical grid with the unique attributes of fossil fuels? How do you make a transportation system with unique attributes of fossil fuels? How do you make an industrial heating system with unique attributes of fossil fuels? And we've built all of these things with the specific attributes of fossil fuels, particularly where we're burning them directly, like, steel furnaces and container ships and stuff like that. And what people need to realize is just nothing has come close to that. Nuclear has the most exciting raw potential, but nuclear, we're so handicapped by bad policy, it's not even good on a global scale yet at producing electricity, although I believe it could be, and I'm fighting for it. Solar and wind are just nowhere near even an electricity because they're not reliable. They're not able to provide reliable electricity cheaply or even close right now. So people just need to recognize fossil fuels are uniquely cost effective and scalable, which means that if you don't have fossil fuels in the near future, billions of people lack energy like that. And you have to decide, is billions of people lacking energy? Like, am I okay with that in the name of whatever I think I'm achieving by eliminating fossil fuels, which in this case is we're going to have less impact or no impact on climate. And my argument is that is not a goal worth sacrificing the energy availability to billions of people over. And to preview it, the energy availability to billions of people allows you to deal with any kind of climate challenge. Whereas with no energy, you can't deal with natural climate challenges or any challenges.
Right. And you make the point how fossil fuels have advanced civilization through creating energy, which allows for machine energy, which allows us to have food security, shelter security, sanitation, the ability to have free time to pursue intellectual advancements for society. You basically lay out the case in the book that without fossil fuels, society, civilization would not be where we're at, and able to even have this conversation, to even have this debate in whatever form or format. And yet, the term fossil fuels is so vilified. There is just such a huge disconnect in the way that people view it. There's such a big part of the world that is just so vehemently opposed to fossil fuels, and they would just recoil in horror at you saying that you want more fossil fuels, not less, by 2050, simply just disregarding how they've indeed helped advance civilization, as you say. Why?
Well, and also,
do you think
I totally agree with that framing, except I would just say it's important. They are doing it right now. So it's not just the past. It's right now. We use fossil fuels more than ever. And absent net zero policies, we're on track to continue expanding them. So people can act like I'm in the minority. I've stood in the middle of New York City with a sign that says I love fossil fuels and challenged hundreds of thousands of protesters and stuff. But in reality, the world loves fossil fuels in practice. And I think that is an important thing. And and the main point, though, is it's part of our present. It's not part of the past. I'm not just celebrating the past, giving fossil fuels social security and a gold watch. And I don't care about that much. I care about the future. That's why my book is Fossil Future. I think the attributes that have made fossil fuels vital in the past, nothing fundamentally has changed to make them less necessary, particularly because most of the world still has very little energy.
Right. And of course, you also discuss the alternatives, and we'll get to that. But my question is, why do you think that fossil fuels and those that support using them are so vilified? Take us down the line of thinking that has gotten us to the place where, net zero is a supposed noble goal.
I think you have to look at it in two different groups. So one is kind of how has the average person been taken in by this? What ideas do they have? And then what kind of the leadership has, who should know better? Because my basic argument is the typical person, it's mostly they've been misled about both the benefits and the side effects of fossil fuels. So what they've basically been told, particularly in recent years, is that fossil fuels have no real benefits because they're rapidly replaceable by so-called renewables or so-called alternatives, primarily solar and wind. So insofar as you believe that fossil fuels, there's nothing uniquely beneficial about them, then it makes more sense to focus on negative side effects. So that's one thing. It would be as if, people pointed out, well, antibiotics have side effects, and including mostly negative side effects in the case of antibiotics. Like, let's get rid of them. Well, if you thought antibiotics had irreplaceable benefits, you might be horrified by that proposal. But if you thought they had replaceable benefits, like, hey, we have these green remedies, right? They're just as good as antibiotics. We can scale them quickly. Then it's no big deal. So one thing is we have this false premise that fossil fuels are rapidly replaceable. So they don't really have any benefits. And then the other side of it is that people think that the negative side effects of fossil fuels are catastrophic, and particularly in the realm of climate. So they think that if we warm the earth a certain amount, that's going to cause not only warming problems, but associated climate changes. And those are going to overwhelm our ability to what people would call adapt. And the point I make about that is if you have to recognize reality so far, which is the exact opposite has happened. So what's actually happened is that thanks in large part to energy from fossil fuels, our ability to master climate danger, particularly to neutralize it. So to neutralize drought via irrigation, to neutralize storms via storm warning systems and sturdy buildings, to neutralize heat via air conditioning, to neutralize cold via artificial heat. Like, all of our mastery level has far outstripped any new climate challenges, which is why the death rate from climate disasters has plummeted by a factor of 50 over the last century, because our ability to master climate, again, mostly using fossil fuels, has far outstripped any climate challenges. So anyone who says climate is going to become overwhelmingly dangerous in the future, they need to grapple with that reality. I don't even listen to anyone's predictions about the future unless they acknowledge the present. And yet most of the people making these predictions don't acknowledge, hey, right now we're in a climate renaissance. We're actually safer than ever from climate. You could speculate about the future, but so far it's been much better. So if the main things are people don't recognize the benefits of fossil fuels because they think they're replaceable, or they just don't think much about energy, that's the other thing. And then they think the side effects are catastrophic. Therefore, it seems like, yeah, it's a really noble goal to eliminate fossil fuels. But the leaders of the movement know that fossil fuels are not easily replaceable, and they start to acknowledge that. Even somebody like Greta Thunberg, who's not exactly a thought leader or the smartest person in the world, is really not kind of an expert. Like, she knows that fossil fuels can't be rapidly replaced, and she'll say as much. That's why she advocates things like eating bugs. Like, it's people are recognizing, the leaders really recognize, yeah, you can't have the life you have right now without fossil fuels. And that, what does that mean for the poor people? They don't really talk about that, but they're kind of okay with a much lower standard of living, although they don't acknowledge how destructive it would be. They acknowledge it would be a lower standard of living. And then on the climate side, they've never been able to answer this argument that our mastery ability outstrips any challenges. And what this points to is the real motivation, I think. And this is the motivation behind net zero, which is net zero is not about we really want a more livable climate. Because if you really wanted a more livable climate and you thought about it for 2 seconds, you'd realize we've made the climate far more livable already. And it's because, broadly speaking, of technology powered by energy, which I talk about in terms of mastery. Like, are we safer from climate now or 100 years ago? People don't know, but if you thought about it for 5 seconds, obviously we're safer now. So the key to climate livability is not impacting the climate. The key is mastering the climate. I even saw recently an ad from ExxonMobil in the 50s, and they talked about oil conquers climate. Like, people used to recognize this, right? That energy is the key to being safe from climate. And if you know anything and your whole focus is let's get rid of our climate impact, even if it means no energy, you don't care about a livable climate. What you care about is an unimpacted Earth. And this is what I break down in Fossil Future. Philosophically, the leaders of this movement, they believe that human impact on Earth is immoral, and they want to eliminate it. And in particular in climate, they think it's immoral for us to impact climate. You need to think of it as a religion. So their number one commandment is thou shalt not impact nature, or thou shalt not impact climate. And they're willing to sacrifice everything to that goal. And they've duped the whole world into it. That's why the whole world, we have a goal that everyone agrees on of eliminating our climate impact, but we don't have a goal of climate livability. We don't have a goal of energy abundance. We don't have a goal of human flourishing. So my view is this goal of eliminating our impact on nature, and in particular climate, has superseded and really contradicted the goal of an Earth where everyone has the opportunity to flourish. And really what I'm doing is I'm just saying, I reject your goal. I reject the idea that human impact is evil or that human climate impact is evil. I think both of those things are great if we get a more livable world, which we generally do. My goal is advancing human flourishing on Earth. And if you look at the benefits and side effects of fossil fuels from that perspective, they are really good across the board, including really good climate-wise.
Right. Now, you say you reject the goal, but do you also reject the so-called science that fuels part of the narrative of this goal? Because you write in your book, the listen to the scientists refrain is almost always used to get us to accept a given policy evaluation without critical thinking, and this is what we must never do. So elaborate on that.
Yeah, but so it's interesting, even the way you're phrasing the question. It's sort of like the listen to the scientists. Notice the word policy in the quote of the book. So I said it's almost, when you hear listen to the scientists, what they're saying is not simply listen to the scientists in their delimited field of expertise and factor that into your thinking about policy. That's a legitimate thing as long as listen to means critical thinking and means they have to give an explanation, including an explanation of where their uncertainties are, what they think is probable, what the evidence is, et cetera. So one problem with, quote, listen to the scientists is it's often like listening to a religious authority. It's like it's basically bowing to them. So you should never bow to anybody, but in general, yes, you should consult the people with the most expertise. You should certainly take in what they say, and you should be interested in explaining it, and they should be interested in explaining it. But what you absolutely cannot do is take somebody who's a subject matter specialist and then allow them to dictate overall policy. So for example, if you take somebody who's an expert in, say, paleoclimatology, so the history of climate throughout Earth, throughout Earth's history, the millennia and even ultimately over billions of years, I guess, but like hundreds of millions of years at least, like you don't listen to them about should we get rid of fossil fuels, because that has to do with economics. It has to do with energy economics. It has to do with the science of human flourishing, and it has to do with climate livability, which, by the way, most climate scientists know next to nothing about climate livability. Climate livability is more of an economic issue. It's, hey, what kinds of climate conditions can humans flourish in? And as we see, that's mostly based on technology and specifically mastery. So what the listen to the scientists is always get some specialist who has a policy that you like and have everybody bow down to that person. This happened during COVID too. It's right. Just listen to this infectious disease specialist and he wants to shut down all the schools. Well, you can't shut down all the schools based on infectious disease expertise, leaving aside whether this person is the best expert or not. So that's the thing. I'm for integrated thinking about these issues and consulting experts. But again, they have to be advisors who explain things to us. They are not religious authorities in their domain, let alone every domain.
Right. We always encourage critical thinking, contrarian viewpoints, and getting your data from a number of sources and a multitude of perspectives. And that's exactly what the book does. And that's what the book encourages people to do, again, to look at things from a different framework and the greater goal there. But yet the goal remains for the vast majority of the world to get to net zero. So help us understand what would happen if we did get to net zero 2050? Is that even possible? And if it were, what does that look like? What does that mean for billions of people?
I mean, it's possible only if you had the most extreme human tragedy. Like if a meteor hit Earth and killed everyone, then we'd be at net zero. and I'm not saying that to be cute or anything like that. There's no way that people are living anywhere near the way they live today, let alone the way we would want them to live by 2050 with net zero. I mean, the basic facts, we've covered some of them, are fossil fuels are uniquely cost-effective and scalable form of energy. Cost-effective and scalable energy allows us to use machines to be productive and prosperous versus impoverished and endangered. And the vast majority of the world still lacks energy in significant quantities. We have 6 billion people who use an amount of energy that we in America would consider totally unacceptable. We have 3 billion people using less electricity than a typical US refrigerator does. So we have an energy impoverished world. And energy poverty versus prosperity is fundamental to whether we can have a good life. And fossil fuels are uniquely capable of providing it at today's level, let alone tomorrow's needed level. There's nothing that can, when people talk about the cost of net zero, they have no idea what they're talking about if you think you can put a number on it. Think about this. Can you put a number on the Holocaust? How much did the Holocaust cost? How much does it cost to kill 6 million Jews, 11 million? You can't put numbers on this kind of thing. But it is like a global Holocaust in whatever the intent is, in terms of you deprive people of the energy they need to power the machines that give them life. And I'll just give you an example of agriculture. This was the thing that first got me really motivated to focus on this issue now 17 years ago. The whole world to get fed. We have 8 billion people who can be fed better than we used to be able to feed 1 billion. This is a totally unnatural phenomenon. This is this delicate economic phenomenon that depends above all on two things. One is incredibly powerful machines that can do 100 to 1,000 times as much as a human manual laborer, like a modern combine harvester, powered by really efficient energy like diesel from fossil fuels. So you need the incredibly powerful machines. And then you need fertilizer to dramatically increase the land's potential productivity. And we have natural gas. Natural gas is our only source of globally scalable fertilizer. So if you took away oil and natural gas, as they're advocating, you literally starve the world. And it's so, and just one more perspective is we're already seeing a global energy crisis, and we're already seeing blackouts in the United States, the degradation of our grid. And we haven't even moved in the direction of net zero. All we've done is we've slowed the growth of fossil fuels globally, and we've created all of these problems. We haven't even reduced fossil fuels globally yet. They want to get rid of them in 26 years. So it's just such a global act of global homicide they're advocating. Now, in practice, are we going to do it 100%? No. Obviously, China's not going to do it. Whatever they say about net zero, they have 300 new coal plants in the pipeline designed to last 40 years or more. India's not going to do it. Russia, sure as hell, is not going to do it. They've been very open about that, which is the only positive thing you could ever say about Putin, probably, that he's honest about wanting to use fossil fuels. So what is going? So what's going to happen is the wealthier world is going to screw itself over. So we're going to impoverish ourselves, at least to a significant degree, before we wake up to some degree. And then we're really going to keep in poverty the poorest parts of the world, because those are the parts of the world that could be industrializing like China did, like India did, using fossil fuels. But we've roped them into all these international climate agreements and development funds and this kind of thing. And we're tying them to aid. And then we're tying the aid to getting off fossil fuels. So you're basically saying, we're going to pay off mostly dictators, so that you guys don't use the energy that you need to grow. And this is considered moral, but it's the most immoral thing imaginable. So the two biggest casualties are going to be sort of what I call the empowered world. We're going to disempower ourselves, which, by the way, is really bad for global security, as we're already seeing with the rise of Russia and China. And we're going to keep indefinitely unempowered the poorest parts of the world, unless more people reject this net zero agenda and embrace positively an energy abundance and human flourishing agenda.
What is the connection between fossil fuels and capitalism? Because you lay that out in the book.
Well, I mean, in general, so capitalism, is the economic system that's based on the protection of property rights. That's the core thing of it. I mean, it's individual rights in general, but it's this, in particular, this idea that you are allowed to acquire and use property as you judge best. And this is really the root of all human productivity, is because we live in a material world. And so in order to produce, you need the mind to figure out how to rearrange the material world in more beneficial ways. For example, the reason that we had what's called the shale revolution in the United States is we have uniquely good underground property rights. So people could acquire those property rights, they could experiment, they could innovate, and ultimately they did something that just totally changed the world for the better. So capitalism unleashes fossil fuel innovation. More broadly, it unleashes energy innovation. And the energy innovation, particularly fossil fuel innovation, is what's responsible for the existential state of capitalism as we know it. So you think about somebody coming from a poorer country to the United States, and they just see like, oh my God, where is this abundance coming from? It doesn't make any sense, right? Where I grow up, we have nothing. Like we don't have toilets, like you guys have toilets, and there's just infinite goods and services, and you just control whatever you say. You're afraid of climate, you control the climate on a whim. You can live in swampy Florida, you can live in polar Alaska. Like you're Superman, you're superhuman. Like the current state of capitalism is totally based on the amount of energy that we're using, because it's all about capitalism unleashing us to produce machines that produce far more value than we ever could with our bodies. In the United States, we have 75 full-time machine servants per person. Like, just think about what we're doing right now. We're just having like a relaxed conversation. You're in a great studio. Like I'm in my home in Laguna Beach with lights and stuff, and we can just have a conversation. Like, this is not a natural phenomenon at all. It's all these machines working on our behalf, but that only works if the energy is sufficiently cheap, reliable, versatile, and scalable. And that's only been made possible by fossil fuels. And for the foreseeable future, it's only going to come from fossil fuels.
Right. And again, you really, as I say, put this idea forward of looking at the benefits. You're not disregarding the side effects, but you are making the point that the benefits of human flourishing far outweigh the side effects. And as you just re-articulated, that the energy allows for society, for civilization to not worry about food or to not have it consume all of our time, sanitation, shelter, which then allows for more intellectual growth and development. But it's important that you do acknowledge that there are side effects to fossil fuels.
Yes.
As you say, everything positive does have side effects. So what are the most concerning side effects to you, and how can we mitigate those?
Well, I have to say something about the side effects, because fossil fuels do, I talk about this, I think in chapter 4 of the book, fossil fuels have a unique relationship to negative side effects that almost no other technology has. This is true of all energy technologies, which is energy technologies have the ability to theoretically cure their own side effects, which is very rare. So an antibiotic, you can take an antibiotic, it gets rid of some bacteria, but it causes a rash. Like, it has a negative side effect, and the antibiotic itself can't get rid of the rash. Whereas fossil fuels, imagine fossil fuels cause there to be less rainfall in some region, but they can cure that in effect by allowing you to irrigate, by allowing you to transport food. That's why we've driven down drought-related deaths by 99%, even if fossil fuels have contributed to some drought in some places, which is questionable, because in general, a warmer world is a wetter world. But insofar as they have contributed to drought anywhere, they've overwhelmed that. They've cured that with their benefits. So that said, so you have to think about, well, what are the you always have to think about, well, how do fossil fuels neutralize or cure their own side effects? I would say the number one side effect that people should be concerned about is significant amounts of air pollution. And a part of it is just an aesthetic thing. It's unpleasant. It can breathe, it can make it hard to breathe. It can definitely create health problems in certain quantities, not really the quantities we have in the United States, but in certain quantities, it can be problematic. And this is why it's been a really good innovation to be able to filter in different kinds of ways, fossil fuel-based energy. And in particular, natural gas doesn't need it so much, but in particular, coal from power plants, using power plants and also open furnaces. And then oil in terms of, different kinds of things we can do with tailpipe emissions. Like, we can make cities demonstrably cleaner and healthier by reducing those side effects. But the key is you have to reduce them in a way that's consistent with energy abundance, because if you take away the energy abundance, then you take away your whole health system. Like, whatever fossil fuels did negatively to health, let's say 40 years ago when air emissions were far worse, we still had skyrocketing life expectancy because the health benefits of having things like healthier food, abundant food, malnutrition being the worst food thing health-wise, having hospitals, having medical care, early detection, better cancer stuff, like all of these things. Like, if you had to choose between, like, if you had to choose coal 40 years ago or nothing, you should definitely choose coal 40 years ago. The great thing is, as we innovate more, which by the way is made possible by time and energy freed up by fossil fuels, then we can have more benefit with less side effect. And by the way, we also open up the possibility of ultimately creating superior alternatives, which we all should want. That's why I'm a big advocate of nuclear energy, of unleashing nuclear energy, getting rid of a lot of the bad policies, because I want to see a form of energy emerge during my lifetime, certainly my kids' lifetime, that's 5 times better, 10 times better than fossil fuels. But you don't get that by banning fossil fuels and making everyone poor and die early. You get that by having a world of innovation and capitalism where fossil fuels ultimately pave the way for something superior. It's a gradual process, but it's a process we should welcome, but you don't welcome it by destroying the fossil fuels that make it possible.
But you don't actually see the total elimination of fossil fuels as a goal at all, right? I mean,
no. It's not an end in itself. No, it's only in the same way of, I'm trying to think of an analogy. You just want things to evolve in a way that is superior. So it would be like exactly if I said, hey, I would like to see a world, hypothetically, where there's something better than antibiotics for dealing with bacterial infections or something like that. That is not at all to say my goal is to eliminate antibiotics. No, my goal is to deal in the best possible way with bacterial infections. So that's the same thing with fossil fuels is no, we shouldn't set a goal of no fossil fuels. We should set a goal of energy abundance. Fossil fuels are currently the way to get there, but also the way to get to superior things. I'm very excited about things that could be superior. Unfortunately, most of what's pitched as superior, like solar and wind, is actually currently wildly inferior. And it's a really insincere pseudo techno enthusiasm. It's not that people are really excited about these unreliable technologies that can't power any grid anywhere on their own yet and have no solution for most of what we get fossil fuels from. That's just an excuse people have to get rid of fossil fuels. They just say, hey, we'll get rid of fossil fuels, but guess what? You'll all be fine because we have all this wonderful solar and wind. But they don't know the first thing about solar and wind, and they don't care. They just want to dupe people into getting rid of fossil fuels to achieve this, quote, goal of not impacting climate. So again, it comes down to this religious view, this really primitive religious view that it's just evil for us to impact climate, and we should never do that. It doesn't make any sense. Like, if we impact climate as a side effect and the benefits are far greater, that's great. Also, we're rapidly going to move toward the point where we directly impact climate deliberately. Like, we're going to figure out how to neutralize hurricanes. People don't like this often, but we're going to control the weather at some point. And that's, you have to figure out how to do it, but that's going to be good. We already have technologies for warming and cooling the earth that we're not fully using. So the path forward with climate is increasing mastery of climate with good laws around it. The idea that we should strive to have no impact on climate, the idea that we should strive to have no impact on anything is an anti-human idea. And that's really the core. I reject this idea that we are some uniquely evil species whose impact we should hate. If somebody said, I want to get rid of bear impact, I would say you are a bear hater. If you want to get rid of human impact, you're a human hater, whether you know it or not.
And fossil fuels allow us to get to the point where we find better solutions and alternatives that maybe arguably have less of an impact, even though having an impact is not necessarily a bad thing.
A negative impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's separate between negative and positive impact. Because I'm so on this with industry because it's been so hard to get them or anyone else to say, to stop treating environmental impact as a bad thing. No, environmental impact is how we survive. There's positive and negative, and most of it is positive. You mentioned capitalism in this wonderful world we live in. That's all positive, or it's mostly positive impact. It's made possible by impact. So let's stop hating ourselves. As a species, I like to say, I used to joke, like, I help oil companies with their self-esteem issues, but it's really helping the human race with its self-esteem issue around its own impact. No lion would ever be ashamed of lion impact. No human should ever be ashamed of human impact.
Right. And as you say, impacting the environment, we do that every day by creating shelter, which allows us to flourish as humans and do greater good. And as you were saying, like, the antibiotics may have side effects, but they help the body stay healthy and then potentially discover alternatives to antibiotics. So fossil fuels can help us get to a better place, potentially, of alternative energy. So what in your mind is the right combination right now of alternative energy sources and fossil fuels, keeping in mind, which many people forget, that fossil fuels are what makes, the solar panels in the first place, and
Right,
the windmill turbines as well. You're not going to make those without fossil fuels, and then you still most of the time need the coal that electricity runs on. But what, Alex, would you say is sort of the policy combination that we should have right now?
I think it's a really common question. It's an understandable question, but I think it's the wrong question. So I don't think anyone should be saying, like, I'm smart enough to know that I am not smart enough to dictate or have an opinion on what the balance of energy should be. It's very simple. We should just have energy freedom. So people should be free to produce and consume energy as they judge best, with reasonable laws protecting people against pollution and other forms of endangerment. And then let people figure it out under capitalism. So my whole focus is, how do we get, insofar as the government is in the way of any energy technology succeeding, I want to get it out of the way. So I want to get it out of the way of nuclear. I want to get it out of the way of fossil fuels. I want to get it out of the way of geothermal. And I want to get it out of the way of truly reliable solar and wind, in the sense of, if people can figure out how to combine solar, wind, and storage, or solar, wind, and some reliable energy, if they can figure out better ways of doing that, great. I'm trying to argue in my policies for, here are policies that actually would unleash the potential of every form of energy. So people have this idea, it's a statist idea, it's an anti-capitalist idea, that the goal of an intellectual in policy is to tell everyone what to do. And I think the goal of an intellectual in policy is to free everybody to discover what is best.
All right. Well, speaking of freeing philosophies and freeing discoveries, I want to bring it to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin you have spoken about as energy money, and Bitcoin often gets vilified for using energy in order to exist. So why are you pro Bitcoin? Explain how you see Bitcoin fitting into the broader narrative of what you call energy money and sound money.
So, I mean, how I think of Bitcoin is actually how I just described my view on energy. I really believe in human freedom in all areas of life. And just as energy is a fundamental area of life, money is a fundamental area of life. And ever since I've understood capitalism, I've always objected to the idea that the government dictates money. I think people should be free to discover what is the best form of money for them. That's going to lead to the best form of money, and it is also going to protect you from many abuses that a monopoly on money can achieve. And what we've seen with the government's monopoly on money is, I don't have to tell your audience this, but you totally dilute the purchasing power. You use money to manipulate the economy in all sorts of ways, favoring different sectors over other sectors, favoring certain people over other people. You just create enormous amounts of corruption. You create all sorts of, you sort of screw up the long term in all sorts of ways with deficit spending, which we're just seeing more and more, and everyone seems to embrace it right now. So I just believe in freedom in money, and Bitcoin is a fascinating innovation in that. It's really, gold has always had this amazing kind of, set of characteristics, much like fossil fuels do. And kind of Bitcoin is saying, well, this is we can replicate the core things about gold that make it really good for money without actually needing this physical thing. And it could be better than gold in different ways. And I think there's plausibility to that. So I'm not one of these people who thinks, I'm not, what you call a Bitcoin maximalist, where I have this confidence that Bitcoin is going to take over or something like that. But I do believe that it's really important to have innovation in money and freedom in money. I'm very excited by what Bitcoin has done. I mean, it's a real achievement from everything we've seen so far. And we sure as hell need to fight to protect it from the government. And I can certainly do my part by protecting it against specious arguments about energy. And basically the argument is, Bitcoin uses a lot of energy, so you shouldn't be allowed to use it because its energy means a lot of fossil fuels. And the Bitcoin people often say, oh, no, we don't use any fossil fuels, which is total BS. Don't buy into that kind of thing at all. Another time we could go into all the fallacies there. But the main thing is, everything good in life requires a lot of energy. So if Bitcoin is a good that you're pursuing and you think it's good, then embrace the fact that it requires energy and say, hey, this is a really good use of energy. I think that's the core thing the Bitcoin community needs to do, is to say, hey, we're creating something really valuable. It's good to use energy this way. And just like with all other good uses of energy, the benefits of fossil fuels far outweigh the negative side effects, and in many ways cure the negative side effects. So don't be guilty about it. Be proud of it. Be a proud human. Don't be ashamed for impacting the earth. Like, be proud of impacting the earth as long as it's in an overall good way.
Be a proud human. Don't be a human apologist. A final thoughts here, Alex, as we wrap up. Our viewers tend to like Bitcoin, like gold, because it links back to this idea of self-sovereignty, of freedom, of libertarian ideals. How is that aligned with fossil fuels and not having the government dictate whether you can have a gas oven or how much power you can consume? Pull all of that together for us thematically.
Well, it is possible for people to advocate fossil fuels and not be very pro-individual freedom. I was very pro-individual freedom coming into fossil fuels. And I think ultimately, if you value individual freedom, you have to get that physically so much of the manifestation of what you enjoy about individual freedom is made possible by fossil fuels. Now, look, in 1776, there was a lot of individual freedom in a certain way, and individual freedom was certainly valid back then, and we owe an endless debt to the founding fathers. But in terms of the kind of physical freedom that political freedom makes possible, that just the idea of, we can go to beautiful places, we can visit our relatives. We just had our son is now almost 10 weeks old. Like, he can have his grandparents visit him. He can go see the world. Like, you think about the amount of opportunity that exists, like the amount of physical, like existential freedom he's going to have going forward. It's just all made possible by these amazing machines that just do almost everything for us, which are powered by this uniquely cost-effective and scalable form of energy. But that itself is only possible because of the system of individual freedom that leads to the innovation. So you have this really virtuous circle of individual freedom leads you to discover and implement these physically empowering these to empower yourself physically, and then that allows you to make even more use of the political freedom. So the political freedom now, even though we have less of it, in a sense, it makes possible a better life than it did a couple hundred years ago. And what we really need to do is get back to way more political freedom, because that's going to give us a way better life in terms of what we can do. And it's going to give us a much better life in terms of what we can create. So anyone who loves individual freedom just needs to recognize our lives are so good insofar as we've given the freedom to produce and use fossil fuels, and they should want more of it. They should be eager for more.
Alex, if people are eager for more, Alex, where can they learn more about you? I know there's
transition.
Alex AI.
There's Alex AI, soon to be free to the public, actually. So we're working on that. The best way to do it, I would say, is just go to my Substack, alexepstein.substack.com. You can just sign up for that. That's free. You can sign up for that. You'll learn about Alex AI. You'll learn about everything else. You'll learn about my Energy Talking Points website. So I would just say that if you liked what you heard today, I hope you check out the book Fossil Future. But whether you do or not, we have by far the world's biggest repository of free information about energy. And the goal is just to take everything that's in my head, which is quite a lot at this point, and everything that's in my team's head, and make it really easy to use. So I think if you check out our Energy Talking Points resource at alexepstein.substack.com, you'll be pretty blown away by what we've created. And it's all for you. I love scalable stuff, and the internet makes it possible to make me scalable. And as you'll see soon, you can use Alex AI, which is another scalable version of me that's rapidly improving.
And all currently powered by fossil fuels.
Of course.
And we'll wrap up on that note, because I know you have to go. But Alex, hope we got a hint of what you're trying to put out there in both of your books to our viewers. And we look forward to having you back on. Alex Epstein, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Alex. Thank you to our viewers. And again, a big thanks to our sponsors, Swan Bitcoin. I do want to highlight the Swan IRA product, where you can take advantage of the benefits of Bitcoin's long-term potential in a tax-advantaged account. Now, with a Swan IRA, you're holding real Bitcoin, not proxies. And opening a Swan IRA is very simple. You can initiate a transfer or rollover and then hold real Bitcoin in your new IRA. And there's a way to set it up. You're basically buying Bitcoin on autopilot. And that, of course, allows you to take advantage of dollar cost averaging and those Bitcoin price moves as you accumulate Bitcoin into your IRA. And unlike when you trade Bitcoin outside of a tax-advantaged account, doing so within an IRA allows you to avoid the often very tedious process of reporting trades on your taxes every year. Now, if you're interested, there is a link in the description with a special offer for our Kitco viewers to help facilitate that process. So make sure to check that out. As always, thank you for checking us out. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe and feel free to leave your comments, praise wine, or just opine. We do love hearing from you. From me, Michelle Makori, and the rest of the Kitco team, we'll see you again soon.
On the Spot with Michelle Makori is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin. Swan Bitcoin IRA. Your legacy, your way. Real Bitcoin, not proxies. Traditional and Roth IRAs. Fast, easy setup. Start now at swan.com/retire.